The world I knew began where the great river carved its path, a shimmering silver serpent winding through the Valley of Whispers. It was a place of endless green, where trees stretched so high their topmost branches seemed to tickle the belly of the sky, and their roots, thick as the bodies of ancient mammoths, held the earth in a firm embrace. My name is Kale, and I was just turning 10 seasons, old enough to begin truly understanding the rhythms of our tribe, the children of the river. Our days were painted with the hues of the sun and the deep shadows of the forest. I woke with the first chirping of the dawn birds, a symphony that pierced the cool morning air. The air itself was thick and sweet, smelling of damp earth, wild honey, and the faint musky scent of animals stirring from their sleep. Our sleeping hollow, a sheltered curve beneath a massive ancient oak, was always the first to catch the morning light. My mother, Alara, would already be tending the fire, coaxing embers back to life with gentle breaths, her face illuminated by the dancing flames. Her movements were always quiet, efficient, like the flow of the river itself. She was the one who knew the secrets of the plants, which berries were sweet and safe, which roots held sustenance, and which leaves could soothe a fevered brow. Her hands, nimble and wise, could weave sturdy baskets from reeds and prepare the day's meals with practiced grace. My father, Eris, would be the next to stir, a low rumble in his chest that echoed the deep calls of the forest. He was a hunter, strong and silent, with eyes that saw everything and ears that picked up the faintest rustle of leaves or the distant crack of a twig. His tools were simple, a spear tipped with flint, a bow carved from supple wood, arrows fletched, with feathers. He moved through the forest like a shadow, becoming one with its depths, understanding the paths of deer, the habits of boar, and the hidden dens of the great cats. When he returned, often at the setting of the sun, he brought not just food but stories whispered from the wild, tales of a new herd seen by the northern ridge or the fresh tracks of a cave bear near the great falls. These stories were our maps, our warnings, our history. My younger sister, Lyra, was still small, her world confined mostly to our hollow and the sun-dappled clearing outside. She chased butterflies, giggled at the antics of squirrels, and watched everything with wide, curious eyes. Sometimes she would sit beside Mother, mimicking her movements as she crushed herbs or sorted berries, already learning the ancient ways. I, on the other hand, was now permitted to venture further, though never alone. I would accompany Father on his scouting trips, learning to read the signs of the forest, to walk softly so as not to disturb the sleeping earth, and to distinguish the call of a friendly bird from the warning cry of a startled one. My hands were still clumsy with the flint, unable to chip it with the precision of father or grandfather. But I was learning. Every day was a lesson, every rustle of leaves a whispered word from the ancient world. The Valley of Whispers was bountiful. The great river provided fish in abundance, their scales flashing like scattered jewels beneath the clear water. Its banks were lined with fruit trees, their branches heavy with sweet, ripe offerings in the warm seasons. Beyond them, the forest. Floor was a mosaic of edible fungi, medicinal plants, and small burrowing creatures that Grandfather taught me to track. Grandfather, old Kale, was the keeper of our tribe's memories. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, each line a story, his voice a low, raspy murmur that carried the wisdom of countless generations. He taught me the names of the constellations, the patterns of the migrating birds, and the proper way to honor the spirits of the forest. He said that everything had a spirit, the river, the trees, even the smallest stone, and that we, the children of the river, were merely guardians of this sacred balance. Our tribe was small, perhaps 30 souls, all connected by blood and shared purpose. We moved through the valley with respectful reverence, taking only what we needed, never wasting. We understood that the forest was both provider and protector, and that its bounty was not infinite. We knew the places where the wild bees built their honeycombs high in ancient trees and the secret groves where the sweetest berries grew. We also knew the signs of danger, the broken branches left by a passing woolly rhinoceros, the fresh scratches of a saber-toothed cat on a tree trunk, or the sudden silence that sometimes fell upon the forest, a hush that screamed of a hidden presence. My own tools were simple: a sharpened stick for digging roots, a small, smooth stone for cracking nuts, and a bone needle for stitching together hides for warmth. I spent hours practicing my throwing arm, imagining my spear finding its mark in a distant tree. Father patiently corrected my stance, showing me how to channel the strength from my legs through my arm and into the throw. "The forest gives us life, Kyle," he would often say, his voice low and serious. "But it also tests us. You must be ready." And I tried to be. I watched his every move, listened to his every word, trying to absorb the knowledge that had been passed down through generations. One afternoon, while Mother and I were gathering watercress from a shallow part of the river, I saw something new. The river, usually clear and swift, seemed to carry more sediment than usual, a fine reddish dust that clung to the roots of the water plants. Mother noticed it too. She knelt, cupped her hand in the water, and let the muddy silt run through her fingers. Her brow furrowed slightly, a rare sign of concern. "The high rocks," she murmured, gazing upstream. "The rains have been heavy far to the north." It wasn't a threat, not yet, but it was a reminder that our world, though seemingly constant, was always subtly changing. The river, our lifeblood, was also a messenger, bringing news from lands we had never seen, lands beyond the towering trees and the distant peaks. It was a whisper of a wider world, a world of forces far greater than our small tribe, a reminder that even in our abundant valley, we were just a small part of something vast and powerful, constantly in motion. It made the familiar forest feel even more alive, filled with secrets beyond our sight, secrets carried on the currents of the great river. The next morning, the river was still murky, a subtle but persistent reminder of the world beyond our valley. I found Father by the fire, sharpening a new spearhead. The flint chip danced beneath his experienced hands, each strike precise, deliberate. He let me sit beside him, not just to watch, but to listen. He wasn't talking about hunting, not with words anyway. He was teaching me the language of the stone itself, the way it fractured, the tiny whispers it made as slivers flew off, the feeling of its edge growing sharper. He explained that a good tool was a collaboration with the earth. "The stone already holds its shape inside," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You just have to show it the way out." I tried to mimic his touch on a smaller, softer piece of rock, but my hands were too clumsy, too full of a boy's impatience. The rock splintered unevenly, uselessly. He didn't scold me, just took the rock and with a few quick, expert strikes, turned my failure into a new jagged scraper for a hide. It was a lesson in both craftsmanship and humility. Later that day, the sun high and hot, a deep sense of unease settled over our tribe. It wasn't anything you could see or hear. It was a feeling that ran through the air, a silence that felt heavy and wrong. The usual sounds of the forest, the chatter of monkeys, the calls of birds, the buzzing of insects, had gone quiet. It was the kind of quiet that spoke of a predator, something big and slow and powerful, passing through our territory. Father and the other hunters moved with a different kind of urgency, their faces grim. They checked the snares we'd set for smaller game, not to gather food, but to make sure they hadn't been sprung by something larger. They sent out scouts, men with years of experience, to circle the perimeter of our clearing looking for signs. Stayed close to Mother, helping her sort the day's harvest of wild grain. Even her work felt different. Her quick, nimble hands were now a little slower, her eyes constantly flicking toward the dense tree line. She hummed a low, ancient tune, A song, she said, was meant to soothe the forest spirits, to remind them that we were their children. Lyra, my sister, seemed to feel it too. She had stopped her games and sat quietly in my mother's lap, her small hand clutching a strand of my mother's hair. The elders gathered near the fire, their faces solemn, their voices low as they discussed the possibilities. Old Cale, my grandfather, sat with his eyes closed, his face turned toward the sun. I knew he wasn't sleeping. He was listening. He was listening to the earth, to the wind, to the stories that the quiet forest was trying to tell us. The silence stretched on, a long, drawn-out breath held by the entire valley. The fear was a living thing, a shadow that clung to every tree and every rock. It wasn't the fear of a quick, clean kill, but the slow, agonizing fear of a force we couldn't understand, a power that could erase us from the world just as easily as we had come into it. We were not at the top of the food chain. We were a small, vulnerable part of a massive, indifferent world. Just as the sun began its descent, casting long, crimson shadows across the valley, one of the scouts returned. He was a young man named Bren, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't speak right away. He just shook his head, his eyes wide with a terror that ran deeper than exhaustion. Father and the other hunters moved toward him, their expressions a mix of concern and dread. They didn't need words. They could see the story in his eyes. Bren finally spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's the great cats," he said. "Not one, a family. They've been hunting on the southern ridge. I saw the tracks. They're heading this way. The great cats were our greatest fear. Massive, muscular predators with teeth long as my hand. They were the apex of our world. They hunted in pairs, their silent, lethal movements a constant threat. The fact that an entire family was on the move, likely driven from their usual hunting grounds by a scarcity of prey, was a sign of a deeper imbalance in the forest. A murmur of fear rippled through the tribe. We had faced the great cats before, but always as a single hunter, a passing threat. A family meant a sustained, focused hunt, a force too great to face with just our simple spears and bows. Father's face hardened, his jaw set in a grim line. This wasn't a time for debate or fear. It was a time for action. He turned to old Cale, a silent request for wisdom. My grandfather opened his eyes, his gaze steady and calm. "We move," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We follow the river, to the high caves. The cats cannot follow us there." The decision was made. We would leave our home, the comfortable hollow we had known for generations. The news was met with a mix of fear and relief, the fear of leaving the known, the relief of escaping the unknown. Our small tribe began to move with a quiet, efficient haste. We gathered our few possessions, the sharpened stones, the woven baskets, the dried foods. Mother wrapped Lyra in a thick hide, and I took my place behind her, my small hands clutching the handle of a water gourd. We were a line of shadows moving through the deepening twilight, a small, fragile tribe seeking safety in the darkness, leaving our home behind. It was a lesson I would never forget, that the world was beautiful and bountiful, but it was also a wild, untamable thing, and our survival was a fragile, day-by-day negotiation with its forces. The journey to the high caves was a silent, desperate march. Our small tribe moved as one shadow, our faces hidden by the deepening gloom of twilight. The forest, which was usually our sanctuary, now felt like a labyrinth filled with unseen eyes. The quiet was still there, but now it was broken by the rhythmic crunch of leaves and twigs under our feet, a sound that felt deafeningly loud to my ears. I walked between my father, Eris, and my mother, Ilara, their warm bodies a shield against the cold fear that gripped me. Lyra, my sister, was a small, bundled weight on my mother's back. her soft breathing a fragile comfort in the tense silence. My father carried the heaviest burden, a large woven basket filled with our most precious tools and dried food. He moved with a quiet power, his spear held low but ready. Every few steps he would pause, his head cocked, listening to the night. He was a sentinel, a protector, and in that moment, he was the only thing that stood between us and the great cats. The other hunters, 6 strong men and 2 women, formed a protective circle around the rest of the tribe, their movements a well-practiced dance of vigilance and caution. They were our front line, our defense against a world that had suddenly turned hostile. The path we took was not our usual one. We followed the winding course of the great river, but instead of staying on the well-trodden banks, we moved higher up the slope, away from the water where the cats might be hunting. The terrain was rougher, filled with loose stones and tangled, roots that threatened to trip me with every step. My legs ached, my throat was dry, and my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I kept my eyes fixed on the back of my father's legs, a familiar sight that grounded me in the terrifying darkness. After what felt like a lifetime of walking, the ground began to rise more steeply. The trees thinned out, and the air grew colder and thinner. Ahead in the faint light of the moon, I could see the high caves. They were a series of jagged openings in the face of a massive cliff, their dark mouths like silent screams in the night. This was a place of last resort, a place we only spoke of in whispers. It was a place where the mountain spirits lived, a place that was not meant for us. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through me. But it was a different kind of fear, a fear mixed with awe and respect. We reached the foot of the cliff, and the hunters began to climb, their powerful hands finding purchase in the cracks and crevices of the rock face. One by one we followed, our movements slow and careful. I clambered up the steep slope, my small hands scraped and bruised from the sharp stone. My father was just ahead of me, his hand reaching back to guide me, his strength a steady anchor. I didn't know how he did it, how he climbed with such grace and power while carrying such a heavy load. He was more than a man to me in that moment. He was a mountain himself, a force of nature that could not be moved. We finally reached the mouth of the largest cave, a yawning darkness that swallowed the last of the moonlight. The air inside was cold and still, smelling of damp earth and ancient stone. Old Cale, my grandfather, was the first to enter, his old wizened face a mask of solemn reverence. He carried a small, smoking bundle of dried herbs, a tribute to the mountain spirits. We followed him inside, our small tribe huddled together in the darkness, seeking refuge from the world outside. The cave was immense, its ceiling lost in the blackness above us. We were tiny specks in a vast, silent cathedral of stone. Father and the other hunters quickly built a fire in the center of the cave, its light a small, flickering beacon in the oppressive darkness. The flames cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the stone come alive with movement. We ate in silence, our meal a simple one of dried meat and berries. My mother held Lyra close, her eyes never leaving the fire. We were safe for now, but the knowledge that our old home was no longer safe, that we had been driven out by a force more powerful than us, was a heavy weight on all of our shoulders. We were survivors, but we were also refugees, a small tribe, lost in a vast, indifferent world. The fire crackled, its warmth a small comfort against the cold stone, a testament to our enduring will to live, even in the heart of the mountain. The fire was a living heart in the center of our cave, its warmth a small defiance against the cold, unyielding stone. We had been in the high caves for 2 sunrises now, and the stillness of the place was both a comfort and a constant reminder of our displacement. The sounds of the forest, once a comforting chorus, now seemed a distant memory, replaced by the hushed whispers of our tribe and the soft crackle of the fire. The air smelled different here, not of damp earth and wild honey, but of stone dust, and the faint, coppery scent of minerals. I spent most of my time watching my father and the other hunters. They were a different kind of hunter here. They weren't tracking deer or boar. They were tracking a different kind of prey, safety. They would stand by the mouth of the cave for hours, their eyes scanning the valley below. They were like the eagles that nested in the high peaks, their vision sharp, their patience endless. They were looking for signs of the great cats, any indication that the danger had passed. But the cats were clever, and the forest held its secrets, close. My mother and the other women were busy too. They were finding a new rhythm, a new way of living in this unforgiving place. They found a small spring deep within the cave, its water cold and pure, and they would take turns guarding it. A precious lifeline in our new home. They sorted through our meager stores of dried food, rationing it carefully. They found a type of moss that grew on the damp walls of the cave. And my mother, with her deep knowledge of plants, found that it could be used to make a poultice for our scrapes and bruises. She was finding a way to make the mountain provide, to make this cold, stone place a little more like home. My sister Lyra, however, was restless. The cave was not a place for a small child. The shadows frightened her, the silence oppressed her, and she missed the warmth of the sun and the feel of soft earth under her small feet. She would often stand by the mouth of the cave, a silent, sad figure, her eyes gazing out at the world she missed. I would often join her, standing by her side, my hand on her shoulder. I understood her longing. The cave was safe, but it was not life. It was a place of waiting, a long, drawn-out pause in the story of our tribe. My grandfather, Old Cale, spent his days carving. With a small, sharp piece of flint, he would chip away at a soft piece of stone, his hands moving with a grace and purpose that belied his age. He wasn't carving tools. He was carving stories. He was carving the shape of a deer, its antlers magnificent and proud. He was carving the swift flowing lines of the great river, its banks lined with the ancient towering trees. He was carving our memories, our history, so that we would not forget who we were and where we came from. He was keeping our story alive in the heart of the mountain. One evening, as the last of the sun's light was fading from the sky, my father returned from a scouting trip. He was not alone. With him was Bren, the young scout who had first brought us the news of the great cats. Their faces were grim, their silence heavier than usual. They had news, and I knew it was not good. They sat by the fire, their bodies hunched, their eyes fixed on the dancing flames. After a long moment, my father began to speak, his voice low and serious. He told us that the great cats were still in the valley. They had seen their fresh tracks by the river, and the tracks were moving closer to the base of the mountain. They were hunting, and they were not going to give up. The valley, our home, was no longer safe. But that wasn't all. They had also seen a change in the river. The reddish sediment was thicker now, a sign that the rains in the north were heavier. The great river, our lifeblood, was swelling. The path back down the valley would soon be impassable. We were trapped. The news was met with a stunned silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that was filled with a deeper fear than any of us had ever known. We were not just refugees. We were prisoners. We were on a small, safe island of stone, surrounded by a world that was closing in on us, a world of powerful predators and rising floodwaters. The fire crackled, its light a small, fragile beacon in a world that had suddenly become dark and terrifying. We were alone, and the mountain, our refuge, had become our prison. Our story, which had been a slow, steady march through a bountiful valley, had suddenly taken a sharp, terrifying turn, and we were all just trying to find our way in the darkness. The cave, our refuge, had become a prison. The news from the hunters settled over us like a cold, suffocating blanket. We were a tribe of shadows, our faces pale in the flickering firelight, Fear, once a passing ghost, now had a name and a shape: the great cats and the rising river. My father, Oris, was a man of action, but even he seemed lost in thought, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. The usual low murmur of our tribe was replaced by a deep, unsettling silence, broken only by the soft, frightened whimpers of the children. I remember watching my grandfather, old Kyle. He sat by the fire, his ancient face illuminated by the flames, a silent observer of our collective despair. But unlike the rest of us, there was no fear in his eyes, only a deep sadness. He wasn't looking at the fire. He was looking into it, as if searching for an answer in its dancing flames. After a long time, he finally spoke, his voice a low, raspy whisper that cut through the silence. "The mountain has given us shelter," he said, "but it will not give us life. We cannot stay here. We must move." His words, though simple, were a challenge to our despair. The hunters looked at him, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. "But grandfather," Bren, the young scout, said, his voice trembling, "the cats are in the valley, the river is rising, we are trapped." Old Kale didn't answer him directly. Instead, he stood up, his old bones creaking with the effort, and walked to the mouth of the cave. We all followed him, a quiet procession of terrified souls. He pointed with a gnarled finger to the left, to a place where the jagged cliff face seemed to rise endlessly into the sky. "There," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "is the high pass. It is a long journey, and it is a hard one, but it is the only way out." The high pass. The name itself was a legend, a story we only told in hushed tones around the fire. It was a treacherous path, a narrow ledge carved into the side of the mountain, a place where the winds screamed and the rock was always loose. It was a place of ghosts and spirits, a place no man had ever dared to tread. The hunters looked at the endless vertical face of the mountain, their faces filled with a new kind of fear, a fear of the unknown. But old Kale was a man of wisdom, and his words held a weight that none of us could deny. He had spoken. The decision was made. We would leave the high caves and attempt the impossible journey through the high pass. The preparations were quick and solemn. We packed only what was absolutely essential: a few tools, some dried food, and our water gourds. My father, Eris, and the other hunters fashioned rough ropes from braided vines, their hands working with a grim determination. My mother, Ilara, with her knowledge of herbs, prepared a special poultice to soothe our tired muscles and a brew to give us strength. My sister, Lyra, was bundled securely in a thick hide, her small face pale with fear, her eyes wide with a quiet understanding of the gravity of our situation. We left the cave at dawn, the first light of the sun painting the sky in a fiery display of reds and oranges. The air was cold and thin, and the wind, a silent partner in the mountain's cruel embrace, whipped at our faces. We were a small line of shadows, our backs to the world we had known, our faces turned toward the impossible. My father led the way, his rope tied securely around his waist, his spear held low. He was a mountain himself, a force of nature, and in that moment he was the only thing that stood between us and the long drop to the valley below. I walked behind my mother, my small hand clutching the worn leather strap of a water gourd. My eyes were fixed on the treacherous path, a narrow ledge of loose rock that clung precariously to the side of the mountain. Below us, the great river, now a churning torrent of angry brown water, roared its defiance. The path was not a path. It was a scar on the face of the mountain, a testament to its brutal power. The wind howled, a constant mournful cry that tore at my clothes and pulled at my hair. Every step was a prayer, every breath a desperate plea for safety. We were a small, fragile tribe, walking on the edge of the world, our story a tiny whisper in the face of the mountain's roar. The air was a thin, icy blade that scoured our faces as we began our ascent of the high pass. The sky was a vast, indifferent blue, and the world below was a sea of clouds, hiding the valley that had once been our home. The path was not a path. It was a narrow ledge of loose scree and ancient, jagged rock that clung to the side of the mountain like a scar. With every step, a small shower of stones would break loose, tumbling into the abyss below with a sound like a whisper, then nothing. My fear was a constant, cold presence, a knot in my stomach that grew tighter with every passing moment. My father, Aris, was our anchor. He moved with a grim determination, his body a testament to strength and purpose. He had fastened a thick, braided vine to his waist, which was then tied to the rest of the hunters. They were a human chain, a small, fragile line of life against the immense, unyielding mountain. I walked directly behind my mother, Alara, who, despite the fear in her eyes, moved with a quiet, fierce resolve. She carried Lyra, my sister, on. Her back, the small bundle of life, a constant reminder of why we were doing this impossible thing. The wind was our greatest enemy. It howled through the narrow pass, a mournful, relentless cry that tore at our clothes and threatened to pull us from our precarious footing. It wasn't a wind, it was a physical force, a malevolent spirit of the mountain that sought to punish us for our trespass. I had to lean into it. My body angled precariously against the sheer rock face, my small hands gripping every crevice, every tiny imperfection in the stone for dear life. My fingers were raw and bleeding, my legs trembling from the exertion, but I could not stop. To stop was to fall. Hours bled into one another, an endless cycle of pain and fear. The sun, once a comforting presence, was now a harsh, blinding light that glared off the white stone, making the abyss below even more terrifyingly clear. We were ants on the side of a giant, a small tribe lost in a world that did not care. The only thing that mattered was the next step, and the next, and the next. Our story had become a series of desperate moments. A long, slow-motion fall that we were somehow impossibly surviving. Then, just as my strength was about to give out, I saw something that took my breath away. Far ahead, at what seemed like an impossible distance, I saw a flash of color. It was a single flower, a small, stubborn bloom of vibrant purple growing from a crack in the rock. It was a tiny, fragile miracle, a burst of life in the heart of this dead stone world. It was a testament to the resilience of nature, a small, quiet symbol of hope in a place where there was no hope. It was a reminder that even in the most desolate, unforgiving places, life finds a way. I pointed it out to my mother, and she smiled, a small, weary curve of her lips that lit up her tired eyes. She reached out and touched my cheek with a hand. That was cold and scraped, but still gentle. Her touch, like the flower, was a reminder that even in the heart of our terror, there was still love, there was still connection, there was still hope. The fear was still there, but now it was a little smaller, a little less powerful, a little less complete. I had a reason to keep going, a small purple reason that was blooming in the heart of a mountain. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues, we finally reached the end of the pass. We were exhausted, bruised, and broken, but we were alive. We had defied the mountain and the wind, and we had won. The pass opened into a high, flat plateau, a new world of cold stone and endless sky. But it was a safe place, a place to rest, a place to heal. We huddled together, a small, shivering tribe, our bodies a small island of warmth in the cold, thin air. We had survived the impossible, and in the heart of our shared terror, we had found a new kind of strength, a new kind of hope, a new kind of story. We had walked on the edge of the world, and we had lived to tell the tale. We had not just survived, we had endured.